So I think it's important to remember that in this Easter season, we are moved to think beyond the resurrection of Jesus. That all experiences that Christians have during the Easter season is undoubtedly connected to the resurrection itself, but we are to learn something from the resurrection that goes beyond the storytelling itself. So, for instance, in the book of Acts today, we have one of the most troubling of conversion experiences, that of Saul's. And I'll tell you why I think it's troubling. It's troubling because most of us, especially with our modern way of looking at things, our modern sensibilities, can find it implausible that Saul had such a conversion experience. At one level, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem right. Acts 9 starts off by saying, Saul, still breathing threats against Christians, went to the high priest, asked the high priest for a letter, and that letter gave Saul permission to go into every house of worship and arrest people of the way, meaning arrest anyone associated with Christianity. Does that sound familiar? Does it? All right. Doesn't that sound like ICE? Anyway, Saul is on the road to Damascus, and he has an experience on the road with the risen Christ. We are told that Saul falls to the ground and engages in a conversation with Jesus. Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, the one whom you are persecuting. And Saul is then given instructions to get up and to go into Damascus to the home of Ananias. And then it's Ananias who is to onboard Paul into this new way of life. What makes Saul's conversion experience troubling is how many of us know people in our lives who have come to faith in that way. I'm not suggesting to you that it's impossible. I'm suggesting to you that for most of us, we come to faith through a process conversion experience, a process conversion experience. So there are two types of processes that one could go through for a conversion experience. You can experience Saul's type of conversion experience, which is called punctiliar. It's called punctiliar. In a way, one moment, Saul is breathing threats against Christians, and in an instant, Paul becomes converted and a follower of the way. I mean, he becomes the greatest apologist for Christianity in the New Testament without any prior knowledge or relationship to Jesus. It's as if someone who is totally unchurched, unfamiliar with the ways of Jesus Christ, with the ways of Christianity, with the ways of the life of the church, to come through the doors of Grace Church and all of a sudden say that he or she is the greatest apologist for the faith. And if you were to ask that person, what do you know about Jesus? I know absolutely nothing, but I know I love him. That was Paul's conversion experience. We would say, well, how can you love Jesus and be the greatest apologist and someone who is proclaiming the good news of the gospel if you don't have a relationship with Jesus? That was Saul's relationship. That's how Saul comes to faith, through a punctiliar experience. And some of us, there may be some of us in church this morning who could say, I can relate to Saul. I had that experience. It's not that it's impossible to have, but most of us have a process experience. So the other way in which we come to faith is through process. And that's how the disciples came to faith. Jesus took not only 12 men and women, but he took a group of followers. And over a course of time, he indoctrinated them with the ways of the kingdom of God. Day by day, he was teaching them how to draw closer and nearer to the presence of God. Through service, through ministry, through activity, caring for the poor, the lost, the least, the left out, women, those who are hungry, the homeless. Day by day, Jesus was, through a process, bringing his apostles to a place where they were to understand this is what it means to be a part of God's unfolding work, God's unfolding drama in the world. And I would say that most of us, without having polled anyone in church this morning, I would dare say that most of us have come to faith through some type of process. We were, as children, our parents took us to church, our grandparents, our godparents took us to church, and we attended Sunday school, and we were acolytes, and we began to learn the Bible piece by piece, and we began to, much like a box of puzzles, we began to put each piece of the faith together until we got a clearer picture, and now we began to understand what it means to be a Christian. And for some, it takes a year. For others, it takes 10 years. For others, it takes 50 years. For others, it takes their entire lifetime. And for some, they spend their entire lifetime trying to figure out what it means to be a Christian, only to end life without ever really understanding it. That's process Christianity. Most of us are on that path. Every Sunday when we come to church, there is the hope and the expectation that you're going to learn something new about yourself. You're going to discover something new about God and God's activity and God's work in your life. The joy of coming to Grace Church is that you and I hope and pray every Sunday that God will say something to us that he hadn't said or she hadn't said before. That every Sunday when we come to church and we interact with one another and we engage other Christians on the journey, we'll discover something about ourselves. Haven't you, what I find fascinating in our parish, and I suspect that it happens in many, many parishes, that there are parishioners who've been attending Grace Church for 40 years, and perhaps even sat in the same pew next to a parishioner for 40 years, and you're still learning something new about that person. And you can look and say, we've been sitting in the same pew together for 40 years, and I'm just learning this about you. Process conversion is God's way of always keeping our spirituality fresh. It never grows stale. There's always an element to excitement when we go through this journey because seldom do we go through it alone. Process conversion is like the disciples. They were together. They were making mistakes together. They were learning together. They were supporting each other in times of crisis. They were supporting Jesus. But Saul had a punctiliar conversion. That conversion experience isn't any less important in the eyes of God than process conversion. But it's just that we just don't meet that many people who have a punctiliar conversion experience. Our modern sensibilities just won't allow us to think that somehow God took an individual off the streets with no prior relationship to the faith to come in and be a force for the faith. But it happens. And so we just have to keep in mind that in today's, not only the epistle lesson in Acts, but also in the Gospel of John, today's Easter lesson for us is about conversion. It's more than just resurrection. Resurrection is the impetus that is supposed to invite some form of conversion. And when we often think about the term conversion, or the idea that we have about conversion, some of us, perhaps not at Grace Church, but certainly in the Episcopal Church and in many Protestant churches, we somehow link conversion with evangelicalism. We think that that's something that people on the far right, those who take the Bible literally, that they have conversion experiences, and those of us who are not a part of the evangelicalism movement, we don't expect to experience conversion. Well, I have news for you, my friends. You experience conversions each and every day. It's one of the ways in which God communicates with us. It's one of the ways in which we discover something new about ourselves. When you got up this morning and you got dressed for church, I assure you, you had some type of conversion experience, but you may not have been paying attention to it. Because the conversion experience is one of the many ways in which God communicates to us. God communicated to Paul through a punctiliar conversion experience, and Paul got up, and Paul in the entire corpus of the New Testament, Paul is the greatest champion for Christianity, despite the fact that Acts 9:1 tells us the man got up, got on his horse, breathing threats against Christians. And so part of our Christian maturation, the way in which we grow in Christ, is to embrace this idea of conversion. That part of the Easter narrative is to help us to discover something new about ourselves. If you remember in the beginning of the book of Acts, when the apostles were gathered in the upper room in Jerusalem, conversion began that very moment. Remember that after the rushing of the wind, which we call Pentecost, when the rushing of the wind happens in Acts 2, all of a sudden the disciples and those in the room began to speak in various tongues. And then they go out into the world and they begin to evangelize. And then we're told that the apostle Philip leaves Jerusalem and Philip goes down to Gaza. So yes, this is one of my favorite passages because anytime you're able to link a geographical location that we're hearing about right now in the news, that is front page in the news, it kind of excites me because it gives validity to the Bible. So Philip goes from Jerusalem to the Gaza Strip. He's in the Gaza Strip. He is baptizing people of Samaritans in the Gaza Strip. And remember that when Philip was with Jesus, they tried to avoid going to the areas and the towns inhabited by the Samaritans. Because remember, Samaritans and Jews were at odds with one another. Despite the fact that biblically, since Old Testament times, they are cousins. They are all derivative of the 12 tribes of Israel. But they had a falling out after the division of the the vision of the unified kingdom following the death of Solomon. There was a falling out between the people who represent Samaritans and the Jews. And so even under Jesus' ministry with his disciples, they tried to avoid going into Samaria. But where does the Spirit lead Philip? To a place that pushes in on his comfort zone. Your call is not to go among those with whom you're comfortable, and among those whom you like, and those who look like you, and act like you, and dress like you, and those who provide some level of security. The Spirit led Philip all the way to Gaza, to Samaria. And I suspect that Philip was wondering if they would receive him, and if they would receive the message of the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So if you remember, Philip goes, he baptizes the Ethiopian eunuch, and after baptizing the Ethiopian eunuch, the Spirit whisked Philip away into Gaza, and Philip begins, and to Philip's surprise, the people in Samaria are coming to him wanting to be baptized. And there are so many people coming to him that Philip has to send a message to Jerusalem for the apostles to come and help him. What a wonderful problem to have. I can't baptize all these people on my own. Philip had to send for help. Conversion experiences. I'm sure Philip and the other disciples who were baptizing in the Gaza were probably wondering, how did this happen? How is it that Samaritans, our enemies, have come to embrace this good news of Jesus Christ? This news of salvation, this news of redemption. And then we have Saul. And Saul's conversion reminds us that God is able to meet us where we are and to speak to us in ways that we aren't even aware of. I don't think Paul, in his wildest imagination, ever thought he would be a follower of the way. I mean, Paul was a Pharisee, highly educated. He was, as a Pharisee, he was sworn to uphold the ancient Judaic Hebrew practices of worship. And Christianity ran contrary to that. And so in a strange way, Paul had a legitimate reason for fearing or for being angry at Christianity. Christianity was in competition or in tension with Judaism. So much so that Paul made it his mission to arrest and to murder Christians. It wasn't just to arrest them. It was to extinguish the movement. And the wonderful thing about this text is the more Paul got angry at Christians, the more God began to work on Paul's heart. And Paul, in all of the New Testament, is the one most responsible for creating the church that you and I now enjoy. Were it not for Paul, you and I wouldn't be sitting at Grace Church. Because Paul brought Christianity to the Gentiles. As a matter of fact, the apostles, after they received Paul, it took them a minute to warm up to the idea that Paul was safe. But after they received Paul, this is what the apostles said to Paul. Okay, we will spread Christianity in the Galilee and in Jerusalem. You spread Christianity in Asia Minor and among Gentile communities. And by the way, when you raise money, send some of it back home. That's what the Jerusalem church demanded of Paul in proclamation to the gospel. And because Paul was so faithful in spreading Christianity throughout the Gentile community, throughout Asia Minor, many times having been arrested himself, Paul recounts being beaten several times, being flogged several times. He was jailed along with several others of his companionships. And yet Paul kept the faith and churches kept growing. What a conversion experience. But in order for Paul to embrace that experience, Paul had to see the Christians through a different lens. It wasn't just a conversion experience. It became the first time when Paul looked at a Christian and had to say to himself, all along, you were my sister and my brother. I was persecuting my sisters and my brothers. And so part of conversion experience for all of us is to take a look at those things that are those areas in our common life and in our personal lives that we know don't sit well with God. And we all have them. Perhaps it's someone that you just despise. Just laying eyes on the individual just curdles your blood. And maybe you need to ask God for a conversion experience. Because I seriously doubt if anyone really wants to have that much hatred in her or his heart. Perhaps it's the way in which you might have treated an employee at work who's accountable to you. And you've been mean or non-responsive or dismissive of that individual. Perhaps you can ask God to help you undergo a conversion experience. Maybe when you are around Brooklyn and you're on the streets and you see people begging and you just turn away like we all do because we are all on a mission. Perhaps we can ask God, just sometimes just call me and remind me that I am accountable to my sister and brother, those who are in need. The conversion experience is more than just about our own personal faith. It's how we relate to one another. If one of our parishioners in Grace Church is having a hard time, part of the joy of conversion experience is knowing that you're not alone. And even if we may not understand what you're going through, at least we can pray with you and pray for you. Because this is a praying community. Grace Church is a community that believes in the effective power of prayer. I have seen our parishioners pray for people, and they're praying for people not because it's the right thing to do or because that's what the faith demands of us. You're praying because you really believe that prayer is transformational, and it is. And that's what makes coming to Grace Church every Sunday a joy, to know that you're not alone. And even if folks don't know what you're going through, you're in a community of folk who are on the same journey. And so the Easter story is about a change and amendment of heart, how we see one another, how we engage one another. And the more we are willing to engage one another, the more we'll discover new things about ourselves. We'll find that we actually do have compassion and empathy and love, the ability to love, and the ability to forgive and to bestow grace. And God offers each and every one of us every Sunday, actually not every Sunday, every day, the opportunity to live into that reality. That's the power of conversion. In John 21, in today's gospel text, Jesus encounters Peter. And if you recall, it's Peter who, during Jesus' trial, denies Jesus 3 times. He denies knowing Jesus 3 times. And as a matter of fact, at the Last Supper, the foot washing, Jesus says to Peter, "You will deny me 3 times before the cock crows." And it is Peter who is adamant, "I will never do that. I will never leave your side. I will stay with you to the end." And surely it comes to pass. Peter denies Jesus, knowing Jesus 3 times, and he disappears from the story. As a matter of fact, Peter isn't even present at the foot of the cross. This is Jesus, one of Jesus' closest friends, a brother, someone with whom he laughed with, cried with, ate with, slept with, knew Jesus' heart. And in Jesus' most difficult, challenging hour, Peter was nowhere to be found. You ever been there? When someone was looking for you to be with them and you just didn't have time? That was Peter. But the wonderful thing about Peter is that Peter doesn't give up. John 21 tells us Peter goes fishing. Usually, we go back to those things that bring us joy, the things that give, we get life. It gives us those things that give us life. They define who we are. So Peter is a fisherman, so he goes fishing. Perhaps to try to make sense of his betrayal and denial of Jesus. Perhaps he's trying to figure out his relationship with the disciples, having denied knowing Jesus. Whatever it is, Peter decides to go fishing. That's his moment of peace. And that peace is disrupted by the presence of Jesus. And once Peter gets back to the shore, Jesus engages Peter. "Do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." "Feed my sheep." "Do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, tend my sheep." And then for the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And then the Bible says that Peter was hurt because for the 3rd time Jesus had to ask him this question as if somehow Peter was being disingenuous in his response. And then Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." I suspect that when you've heard this passage either in Bible study or in Sunday school or in sermons, undoubtedly you've heard it in a way described in a way that Jesus was canceling out each one of Peter's denials. 3 denials, 3 "Do you love me?" It sounds good, and that might be the case, but I'm not sure that really is the case. I don't think that's what Jesus was doing. I think Jesus looked at Peter and saw Peter, a human being who was destroyed by his actions. He hurt someone very close and dear to him. And Jesus was giving him the opportunity not to amend for the denial, but to say that in light of the resurrection, you are now called to love and to love unconditionally. Because for Jesus to remind Peter of his denial is not the way God deals with human beings. I have never known God in my life to ever remind me of my failures. I do know that God forgives me and forgives you and all of us when we fail. But God is simply not in the business of making us atone for our failures. It's not as if Jesus said to Peter, we have unfinished business. We got to talk about that little thing you did when I was on trial. I need to have a better understanding how you could do this to me. Think about it. It was Jesus' moment to hold Peter accountable and to make Peter feel bad and own up to his mistake. But Jesus doesn't do that. He simply asks, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Tend my sheep. Take care of one another. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, tend my sheep. Take care of one another. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, tend my sheep. Take care of one another. And if you do that, then you will experience the unconditional grace and love and peace of God. And so I would dare say that Jesus' 3 "do you love me" commandments to Peter had more to do with the conversion experience than making Peter atone for the denials. It could have been Jesus' intent to do that. I could just tell you the Gospels doesn't say that. And that's not how I've experienced God. I don't think God is in the business of throwing up our past in our faces like that. But I do think that what God is in the business of doing is calling each and every one of us to do self-examination and reflection, be honest with ourselves about our shortcomings and those parts of our life that we need to change, those parts of our lives that we need to get rid of that will make us better human beings, better individuals, better friends, better Christians, better spouses, better grandparents, godparents, and to be honest with ourselves and ask God for a conversion experience. Conversion experiences don't always have to be serious, which is why I said many of us, all of us, got up this morning and you had some type of conversion experience. It's just a turning to something new. And the conversion experience can be a conversion experience that's funny and a conversion experience that is life-saving. And this is why, when you look at it through that lens, having a punctiliar conversion experience is not all that uncommon after all. I'll give you an example of I think it's funny, punctiliar conversion experience that I had recently. So ever since I was a child, I despised beets. Someone at 8 o'clock thought I was saying, "You despise beef?" No, beets. B-E-E-T-S. I never liked beets. And part of it's because as a child growing up, going to school, beets was a part of the lunch menu. And as a child, when you look at the little, the beets, and you have the beet juice, it just reminded me of blood. And as a child looking at beets, I was like, there's no way, it's so disgusting. I don't even want to try it, I don't want to taste it, I don't even know why they serve it. And that stayed with me, not only through my childhood, through my adulthood. I would not eat a salad with beets. If the salad could have 50 things on it, and if one of the 50 was beets, and you couldn't take the beets out of the salad, I got to get another salad. I just couldn't do beets. It was just ingrained in me that I just didn't do beets. So a couple of months ago, I'm in a restaurant, and beets is on the menu platter. And it was with turkey. So I'm a fan of turkey. So I decided to get the beets. Beets, because you couldn't change it up. And I decided I was going to eat everything on the plate but the beets. So all of a sudden I decided, okay, I'm just going to just cut into a little bit of the beet. I'm going to eat the beet. Not bad. Not good, just not bad. And all of a sudden, I was like, okay, I can do this. Now, I mean, I'm saying it with a little bit of levity, but for 50 5 years of my life, I avoided beets. And on one try, a punctiliar conversion experience, I decided I'm not going to make it a regular thing to order beets. I'm just not going to go crazy if it shows up on the plate. That's a conversion experience. That's how God deals with us. There are just those moments when God says, now is the time for you to experience something new. I wish it was the kind of experience that I could say, wow, I didn't realize I was missing all this good beets all my life. I wish I had, appreciated beets much earlier. I'm not there. But that's how conversion experiences happen. And that's a little bit on the lighter side. But I have also heard stories of people who have come through what I would call some type of great ordeal to say, I don't know how I've made it through this. It had to have been God's grace. I would not have made it through this without you. Thank you for being there with me in my most difficult time. There have been people who have been lost at sea without any rations. They're in the middle of the ocean. They don't have any signal. They don't have any working radio, and yet they are discovered, they are found, they are saved, and they are in good health. And all they can say is, I just don't know how we survived, but it must have been God's grace, God's presence with me. And all of a sudden, people are converted. So the Easter story for us on this third Sunday in the Easter season is about conversion. It's about allowing God to tap into your heart, my heart, so that we can truly be people of the resurrection. And if we can be truly people of the resurrection, we will learn to appreciate the dignity of every human being. And to do that will gladden the heart of God. That's Easter.